Okay, as promised, I have prepared a short presentation which is called Parliament, How It Works and Does Not Work. Just a moment, because I have a dog who's going to irritate me continuously throughout this whole thing, I can already predict. Okay, just so you can see what my personal audience. There's baby. Threatening to disrupt the thing at any moment. Anyway, this is called Parliament, How It Works and Does Not Work. This is not gonna... I don't want this. Okay. So in this video I want to focus more specifically on Parliament and how that works, its strengths and weaknesses, and all the things that I think about it in regards to this democratic thing. Can I help you? Hello again. As promised, I have prepared a short video focusing more on this political thing, and this video is called Parliament, How It Works and Does Not Work. And as always, I'm going to sort of freeform this because there's lots to it, and this is really the only way I can sort of casually, slowly articulate all the things which I feel like a political opposition, a genuine political opposition, really needs to be, you know, confronting these issues, acknowledging these issues, because the, in quotes, opposition, the official opposition, the Labour Party, is only part of the parliamentary system, and so it can't do anything about the problems of the parliamentary system itself. So what I'm getting at is, why don't we just recap? Let's start off by looking at the thing that started this all off. We've got this bill going through Parliament at the moment. It's called the Police, Crime, Sentencing and Courts Bill, and it's still happening. It's been, what, this is the fourth or the fifth, yeah, this is the fourth day since the first video I posted. You can go and have a look at the Police, Crime and Sentencing Bill on the Parliament website, and it shows you the stage that it's at the moment. It's gone through the first reading, through the second reading, and it's now at the committee stage, and it will tell you, if you click on it, what that means. When it goes to the committee stage, they leave the House of Parliament main floor and go into smaller chambers, and they scrutinise it line by line, and it explains it to you right here. It goes, the committee stage is where detailed examination of the bill takes place. It usually starts within a couple of weeks of the bill's second reading, although this is not guaranteed. Government bills are usually formally timetabled after they have received a second hearing. What happens at a committee stage? Most bills are dealt with in a public bill committee. If the bill starts in the Commons, the committee is able to take evidence from experts and interest groups from outside Parliament. Amendments and proposals for change for discussion are selected by the chairman of the committee, and only members of the committee can vote on amendments during committee stage. Amendments proposed by MPs to the bill will be published daily and reprinted as a marshalled list of amendments for each day the committee discusses the bill. Every clause in the bill is agreed to, changed or removed from the bill, although this may happen, particularly under a programme order, without debate. A minority of bills are dealt with by a committee of the whole floor, which takes place on the floor of the House of Commons, with every MP able to take part. Bills fast-tracked through the House of Commons will receive less consideration. Consolidated fund bills do not have a committee stage at all. What happens after the committee stage is the bill has been amended, the bill is reprinted before its next stage. Once committee stage is finished, the bill returns to the floor of the House of Commons for its report stage, where the amended bill can be debated further and further amendments proposed. And so you see, a bit wordy, but it's there. This is your democracy, this is your country, it's your parliament. The information is there for you if you want to go and read about it. It explains to you how the system works. At the moment there aren't any amendments published because I think that they're only just beginning. Over the next few days they'll probably start pointing out the bits that they want to change or what have you. Anyway, that's as it is on the surface. The problem with it is, firstly, when you have a large majority in the House of Commons, which this party does, the debate is actually null and void. The debate doesn't matter, and essentially they go through this formal process of first reading, second reading, committee stage, what have you, and then it goes through to becoming a law. They go through that formal process as a formality to just to do what needs to be done to make it an official law, but they don't actually need to listen to the opposition. They don't need to take into account anything that anybody says. And you can see this happening time and time and time again. Not just with this government, but many governments before. Every time a government enjoys a large majority in the House of Commons, they essentially push through all of their laws and their agenda for changes. And what did I write? I have some notes to help me remember, to help me keep on course here, so I don't drift off and lose points. But essentially, when you watch Parliament, which you can do, you can start to see how it's supposedly working. On one side of it you've got the government with the front bench and the back benchers, and on the other side of it you have the opposition and the other parties and what have you. And basically they take it in turns to read pre-prepared statements. They don't actually talk to each other, they just stand up and they say, this is awful, this cannot happen, this is an attack on our democracy, blah 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 blah, and then they sit down, and then on the other side of it they stand up and go, I can't believe anyone would not want this to go through, this is very important because the people of the country need to be kept safe, we need to increase sentences for rapists and things like that. And then they sit down, and then on the other side they stand up and go, this is a sad time for democracy, blah 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 blah. So the debate, actually as it happens, is only a show, really. It's like just people talking in the same room. It's not an actual conversation as would happen between you and I, or two people who were actually having a proper argument. It's like, yeah, but what about this? What about this? No, what you just said about that is wrong. How about this? Da 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 da. That's how a debate actually works. It's a back and forth. But actually how they do the parliamentary debate is they all come into the thing with a pre-prepared statement already written. And that probably, I'm not so sure about this, but the Speaker of the House would have something to do with this. They've got like secretaries and clerks and what have you. They probably organise everything. They'll read their statement, they'll read their statement, they'll read their statement, they'll read their statement, da 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 da, until the time is passed and it moves on to its next stage. So the debate is actually void. It's a show. Okay? It doesn't actually affect the bill itself. That's when the government has a majority. They can just, and you saw this happening throughout the whole Brexit thing. It was just two opposing visions basically standing up and speaking, and at the end of the day the government just goes, we're going to go ahead with it anyway. Again, this happens time and time again, and not only in Parliament, but now we have in the country such a sort of determined group of people to make these changes, and it's not only changing the laws, but they're actually destroying people's lives, destroying the green belt, you know, laying down new roads and railways and things like that, because it's all good for the economy and stuff. And this is the way that the Parliament should function, in my view, if you wanted to have like a healthy democracy, is that you vote for your representative and they go in to the Parliament and they genuinely bash out what's right and what's wrong. And that was happening for a while when I was alive, because the government never had a strong majority. The government always had what was called a plurality, which is where they have like 35% or 40% of the overall chamber, and then the opposition is made up of smaller groups, 15%, 25%, 14%, what have you. And in that way, the government is actually dependent on the opposition to agree with what they say. So they have to try to convince people onto their argument. They can't just say, this is what we're doing, whether you like it or not. And for me, that seems like a much more healthy version of democracy. And this is one of the weaknesses of our parliamentary democracy, is that the parliamentary system actually has within it a inherent weakness, which is where it can be taken over by people who want to just lie or fabricate evidence or hide the truth in order to get voted into office. In this case, they got voted in on the back of Brexit, entirely on the back of Brexit, and now they're bringing in all this new raft of legislation, one after the other is going to get changed through. And it makes a mockery of the whole democratic process. Because they're really just doing it for the show of it, so that their laws can have democratic legitimacy, but it's not actually genuinely democratic, you see. And when I say genuinely democratic, I suppose what I mean is that democracy isn't just a system, it's not just a set of rules, it's actually a structure built on values. And those values are democratic values, where we're going to respect each other's right to live and exist, and we're not going to overrule and overpower each other for our own sake and our own gain, which is exactly what this government is all about. They're overruling people. You look at this thing called HS2, which is the high-speed railway they're building from London up to the north through Birmingham. That was a big controversial project which has had huge opposition to it, but they're going ahead with it anyway. And they compulsory purchase land off all these farmers. They can, overbalance various committees, so they get all the planning permissions up and down the country. But it's just because their company and their organisation, the political party that they're part of, has got such funding and sponsorship from these large companies and things, that they can afford to overpower the democracy. Like, the democracy is just made up of people. People haven't got a lot of money, people haven't got loads of organisation, people haven't got loads of time. And so when they have this process, in quotes, to make these changes, like for example there's one happening over the road now, they want to put a railway line through this village. And so then you have to have planning permission, public consultations, back and forth. It might take 5 years, but the fact is that they'll succeed eventually, because they have the money and the time and the resources to stay at it. People haven't got that. And this is one of the weaknesses of the democracy. It's an inherent weakness of our democracy, the democratic system, the parliamentary system. It goes for what's happening in the parliament and all the committees of all the local authorities. So, what am I getting at? I'm sort of rambling, as always. But this is really just to help me, if anything. The more I talk, the more I go at it, the more it sort of clarifies things in my head, so that I'll get better at explaining what I'm trying to say. So, to return to the focus of this piece, it's the Parliament itself. You should have, ideally, a balance of power, so that those who are in power, the government, have to be balanced by the opposition. But in this case, the opposition is so shrunken that the government can actually do what it wants regardless. And let's have a look at this bill. This Police Crime Sentencing and Courts bill is really big. It's like thousands of pages long, and most of it is needed, necessary. You can't really argue against it. It's things like fixing the problems in the parole system, fixing the problems in the sentencing system, making it so that really bad criminals like rapists and sex offenders and murderers and things like that don't get let off early, automatically, which is a problem which has been happening in this country apparently. And so on the face of it, the bulk content of the bill is fine, okay, let's go with that. I'm not arguing with it. However, there's this small clause under it in here, which is also going to basically remove the right to public protest and give police like kind of excessive, dangerous amounts of power, and it's not going to remedy a lot of other issues which are going on in the prison system or anything. And so there you have one side of the argument is saying, what about this tiny little clause? This is wrong, we need to get rid of that. And then on the other side of the argument they're saying, this country needs tougher prison sentences for murderers and rapists and things. My constituents are terrified of etc, etc, etc. And so you see, the debate, they're not arguing over the same thing. They're talking over each other and under each other, and no one's actually been like, okay, why don't we just take that clause out and deal with that at another time? We'll put this lot through now and then we can focus on that. They're conflating two different issues. Do you see what I mean? And in that way, the whole bill is going to get pushed forward and is going to become a law. And so that means that this small clause which is in it is going to become a law because it's being bundled in with this other big lot of issues, even though they're two completely different areas. One is dealing with courts and prisons and sex offenders and things, and the other is dealing with civil liberties of decent public people to go and protest, which is one of their rights. So you've got these two very far apart issues have been lumped together and they're being pushed forward as one. And the argument is not, they're not coming together and they're not talking, they're going around each other. And so the whole parliamentary process at the moment is void, is null and void. And in that way, it makes a mockery of the democracy. And this is why I say it's not really a democracy, it's only a democracy in name only. And in fact, it's a democracy. You see? You get it? You get it? It makes a mockery of democracy. It's a democracy. Alright, you get it. It's a sham democracy, and it's a democracy in name only. And when it comes to political opposition, we, the people, or anybody who's opposed to all of this larger, not just this one specific bill, which is what people are protesting about at the moment, when it comes to the overall problems, the sort of the control and the the state, as it were, the state of affairs, political opposition within Parliament can't make changes because they are actually part of the system. And so there are certain things which will never be changed by the Parliament because the political opposition is actually part of the same system and it's not going to change itself. What I mean by that is, whilst this particular topic has got strong vocal opposition, like opposites on both sides, there are certain laws and bills which have been passed over the last few years which were voted unanimously by all parties. A good example of that is the Snoopers Charter, which Theresa May passed. It's called the I've forgotten what it's called, I'll have to look it up, but its nickname was given the Snoopers Charter. If you search for Snoopers Charter, you'll read about it, and basically that is where all internet providers have to keep a log of every website you visit for a year, and then after a year it gets deleted. But that's in case they want to go into somebody's internet history, like a suspect or a terrorist group or something. They can actually look at all the websites that you've looked at for the last 365 days. And that was a law that was passed by all groups, all parties. And so there are certain aspects of this country that we're living in that all political parties agree on, and that is basically keeping the people under control. And there are only certain big issues which they actually disagree on strongly. And this is where I say the political opposition, in quotes, the official political opposition, that is the political parties who are opposed, that is the Labour Party, etc., they actually are part of the same system, and there are certain big deal issues which they won't ever change because they are loyal to the crown just as much as anybody else is. And there is an oath that the MPs have to take. This is another problem with the democracy that I see. Imagine if you get elected on a ballot amongst your constituents where you stand up and you speak out against the corruption, or you speak out against the system, and you want to change it to make people better off, you want to increase the democracy, you want to devolve power, all that sort of thing. And then when you get voted in, when you arrive at Parliament, the first thing you have to do is stand up and take an oath with your hand on the Bible. And basically in that oath you say, I will always be loyal to the crown and I will never do anything which is going to undermine the crown or its power or anything like that. So immediately the MP has become part of the system, and he will never be able to do anything which is going to try to attack that system. You know, that monarchy, that dictatorship, that imperial control, you know. And there's another thing too which is now coming to my mind. The American Revolution happened because they said no taxation without representation, and it makes sense. Why should you have to pay taxes to the parliament that isn't representing you? Now, when this Tory party took over, this guy Dominic Cummings was one of their chief guys. They purged the whole party of anybody who disagreed, and they made the whole party a complete unit, not through being correct or being right for the people, but because they threatened anybody who disagreed with Boris Johnson. Anyone who voted against anything that the government said would immediately lose their position. And that's a fascist movement, you see. That's a fascist tactic. So if you don't do as you're told, you're going to lose your job. And that means that all of the Conservatives in Parliament are not voting with their conscience based on what their constituents want or need. They're actually doing as they're told from the political, the centre of the political party, the political control, which is number 10. And that means that the Parliament itself at the moment is not genuinely representing the democratic public. And I live in a Conservative area. South Cambs is a Conservative seat. I used to live in Huntingdon, which has always been a Conservative seat. And there's lots of people now in the country who are represented by Conservative MPs. And those MPs don't do anything based on what the constituents say or want. They actually just do as they're told from the control point, the leadership. And that's another argument to be made, that the democratic system is a sham, okay, and it is a pretend democracy which is actually just the shield and the mask and the front of a dictatorship which is behind the scenes, who have another agenda all of their own. And even if they want to, they'll demolish your house. If they need to lay down a roadway and your house happens to be in between their view of what they want to build over the next 10 or 20 years, they'll demolish the house and there's nothing you can do about it. And so, if you're not being represented, then how is this a democracy? And isn't that old calling still valid, still legitimate? That's the calling which created the United States of America. No taxation without representation. And isn't this something that we should be talking about amongst ourselves as the new generation of political opposition? We need to be genuinely acknowledging all the weaknesses of our system. They've got it all sewn up within the rules of their system, but there's no reason to say that you can't change those rules, because our history is a whole storyline of the rules being changed. You know, they used to have no parliament, and then they made a parliament, and then it became a thing where the parliament was controlled by the king, and then they went to war over it. In fact, the king got rid of parliament for 10 years, and that's what caused the civil war. And there's been this whole big toing and froing between a centralised control of the monarchy and the elite and the powers that be, who are basically, they want to control it all for themselves. They groom their young to take over the next generation of power. That still goes on. And the people just have to basically fucking get on with it, lump it, or fucking leave it. And if you try and have an uprising, we're going to shoot you and kill you, or do whatever we can in whatever means are necessary to bring your movement down. And again, that sort of brings me around to this bill right here is the latest example of them diminishing the rights of the public, but going onto the streets and demonstrating about it is exactly where they want you to go. That's exactly where they want you. And so we, as the political opposition, must do something different, and that is at this stage talking, analysing, writing, sharing thoughts, sharing ideas, acknowledging all of the weaknesses of the parliamentary system, seeing how the democracy is not really a democracy, and discussing that, calling out the hypocrisy, calling out the lies. And this talk, I'm trying to round it off because I don't like these things to go on for too long, because I know that some people don't necessarily want to, you know, go into it all that much. But let me say, there's another aspect why the parliamentary system is essentially rigged in the government's favour. Is because the simple fact that the government writes the timetable for what gets debated and how long it gets debated and when it gets debated. So certain issues they could just never bring to Parliament. The concept of the democracy is that anyone's supposed to be able to bring ideas forward. MPs who represent, you know, Liverpool, Hartlepool, Blackpool, all the pools, they're supposed to be able to go to London and say, we want to introduce this bill. That's a right that people have. I'm going to draft a bill and I'm going to put it in Parliament and see what they talk about it. And but the government is the one who actually decides how long things get talked about and when they do, and they could push it right down the timetable and bring all of their own agenda right to the front, you see. So they do have ultimate control. And another point is that these committees, so you've got the main Parliament, the main House of Commons there, and then you have all these little committees, these little bodies all around it who scrutinise and analyse other aspects more in detail. The government are the ones who appoint those committees. And if you look into it, you yourself might have been aware over the last year or two, since the Conservatives have taken over because of this Brexit thing, they neglected to appoint certain important committees, and also they went on a campaign, Dominic Cummings particularly went on a campaign to remove opponents from committees and put in place their own spokespeople, so that the whole committee system was all in favour of the government too. And again, they can pick and choose how things go. And so they have taken over thoroughly, well and truly, taken over the parliamentary structure, and they've removed all of their opponents, or just enough of their opponents that they need to get rid of, and they've filled it up with all the people who will do as they're told, yes men, and not think for themselves and not be brave and not be courageous. And you know, that is something that goes back into history. It's like the mafia or something like that. It's like, that would be a shame if your family's restaurant was to be, you know, suddenly caught fire one night and the fire brigade wasn't there to help you, because that's something that happens, like in the Roman Empire. Just randomly coming into my head, one of the guys, I forget his name, he's quite an important guy, he became the sort of, you know, he became a senator or a consul or something like that, and he was a big important businessman, and he owned the fire brigade. There was obviously a rudimentary fire service back in those days, and he would pick and choose which people's fires to put out based on their political affiliations to him. And sometimes he would actually set fire to people's properties in order to destroy them, and then intentionally not send the fire brigade over there. And in the end he managed to get himself into the Senate, because that was how he operated. And we have to be aware that these people exist. And you know, people who will stop at nothing to gain power, people who will do whatever it takes to gain power, including killing people. Hopefully it doesn't get that far, but they'll still destroy people's lives quite happily, and make a mock out of the you know, the tribunal system and the justice system in order to strong arm the whole thing into the shape that they want it. That's how it is. And I suppose to round off this talk, I will bring in a couple of quotes. One is from C.S. Lewis. You know, he wrote Narnia and that. He says, "The greatest evil is not done now in those sordid dens of crime that Dickens used to love to paint. It is conceived and ordered, moved, seconded, carried and minuted in clear, carpeted, warmed and well-lighted offices by men with white collars and cut fingernails and smooth-shaven cheeks who do not need to raise their voices." And as my final thing to end, I could think of no better spokesperson for freedom and democracy than the great Jean-Luc Picard, because he makes a speech in one of the episodes here which I'll just let you listen because it's just superb. "With the first link the chain is forged, the first speech censored, the first thought forbidden, the first freedom denied, chains us all irrevocably." And with that I will turn you now over to the great Jean-Luc Picard.
We think we've come so far. Torture of heretics, burning of witches, all ancient history. Then, before you can blink an eye, suddenly it threatens to start all over again.
I believed her. I helped her. I did not see what she was.
Mr. Worf, villains who twirl their mustaches are easy to spot. Those who clothe themselves in good deeds are well camouflaged.
I think after yesterday, people will not be so ready to trust her.
Maybe. But she, or someone like her, will always be with us, waiting for the right climate in which to flourish, spreading fear in the name of righteousness. Vigilance, Mr. Worf. That is the price we have to continually pay.